The first thing you need to understand is this. The moment I walked into that lobby, they had already decided who I was, and yeah, that part still stings when I think about it. It was a cold February morning, the kind where the air feels sharp enough to cut your skin, and I remember checking my phone out of habit 8:40-something a.m., because when moments like this turn into stories later, time matters. The lobby was all marble and glass and quiet confidence, the kind of place that smells like money and floor polish, where even the silence feels expensive. And I walked in wearing a hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing flashy, nothing sloppy either, just normal. And I swear you could almost hear the assumptions clicking into place. The receptionist didn't even look up at first, just said, "Real polite deliveries, go to the side entrance," like she was helping a lost kid find his classroom. I smiled because I've learned that if you get defensive too fast, you lose control of the moment. "No delivery," I said. "I'm here to go upstairs." That's when she finally looked at me, eyes flicking from my hoodie to my shoes and back again like my clothes were the real conversation. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "Nope," I said easy. "I'll wait." And you know what I mean when I say you could feel the mood change. Not loud, not dramatic, just this quiet irritation settling in like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Security showed up fast, one of them stepping in front of me with that practiced authority people use when they think you're beneath them but still potentially annoying. "Sir, this lobby is for clients and authorized personnel only." I told him calmly I wasn't delivering anything, that I was visiting. He asked my name. I gave him one that wasn't real, and the receptionist typed like the keyboard personally offended her. "You're not in our system," she said. The guard told me I'd need to step outside. Instead, I walked over to a bench, sat down, pulled out my phone, and said, "That's fine, I've got time." Yeah, that happened. And what they didn't know, what none of them knew in that moment, was that 6 days earlier my firm had finalized the acquisition of that entire company. Majority stake. Real ownership. I owned the floors, the desks, the elevator they were guarding like it was sacred ground. I didn't walk in like that by accident. I didn't want a press release or a red carpet. I wanted to see the truth raw and unfiltered before anyone had a chance to clean it up. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and eventually the elevator opened and out stepped Brent Kavanaugh, the COO, the guy who ran the place day to day. Perfect suit, perfect hair, the kind of confidence that comes from never being questioned. He walked right past me like I was furniture until the receptionist called his name and pointed in my direction. He turned, squinted at me, and smiled, that tight corporate smile that never quite reaches the eyes. "You must be lost," he said. "We don't do walk-ins on the executive level." I stood up slowly, not aggressive, just present. "I'm not lost." He looked me up and down, hoodie included. "Are you sure you're in the right building?" I told him I was exactly where I needed to be. He sighed, dropped into that cold executive tone, said something about tight schedules and not wasting executive time. I sat back down and said, "No problem, I'll wait." He stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or threatened, then whispered to the receptionist to flag security again if I lingered. And as he walked away, I remember thinking, okay, so this is how you talk to people when you think they don't matter. Over the next few days, I moved through that building, quietly blending in, watching, listening. I didn't demand respect. I didn't announce myself. I observed. And what I saw wasn't just arrogance. It was a pattern. Black employees getting cut off in meetings with phrases like, "Let's keep it tight," or "We'll circle back," which everyone knows really means, "We're done listening to you." Women offering ideas that landed flat until a man repeated them and suddenly got credit. Promotions going to the same type of people over and over, same schools, same look, same comfort zone. And that's when I met Nia. She worked in operations logistics, the unglamorous stuff that actually keeps a company running. Early 30s, sharp as hell, always carrying a notebook like it was part of her body. I heard her speak up in a strategy meeting I slipped into under a borrowed badge. She broke down a bottleneck in their system, clearly even showed the savings. I leaned forward because it was good, really good. And then her manager leaned back in his chair and said, "Interesting, but let's circle back later. There's probably a simpler fix." And that was it. The room moved on like she hadn't just solved a problem they'd been tripping over for months. Later, I found her in the break room pouring coffee that looked like it had been sitting there since the last administration. I told her I heard her model. She looked surprised. "You were in there." I nodded, said they'd called me a different name. She laughed quick and tired. I told her she was good. She shrugged and said it didn't matter. When I asked why, she didn't hesitate. Because it wasn't his idea, she said, and because I don't look like I belong in the room that decides things. 5 years, she told me. 5 years there. Trained 3 guys who were now her bosses. That familiar ache settled in my chest, the one you get when you realize you're watching the same story play out in a nicer building. I told her I was starting to see a pattern. She looked at me carefully, asked what I did. I told her I did the kind of job where I get to see who people are when they think no one's watching. She smiled and said, "Then watch carefully. This place has layers." She was right, because once Brent started getting suspicious of me, things got ugly fast. He called IT, called HR, started digging. And instead of blaming the guy in the hoodie, they went after the easiest target, Naya. One morning she walked in and realized she'd been removed from meetings she'd attended for years. HR pulled her into a compliance chat, accused her of sharing internal data with someone unauthorized. She found me later furious and scared, told me she might lose her job. I told her she hadn't leaked anything. She laughed bitterly and said perception was enough, and she was right. That's when I wanted to tell her everything, wanted to end it with a phone call, but I didn't. Because fixing one thing loudly in a broken system doesn't fix the system, it just teaches it to hide. So I told her I'd fix it, and she told me to do it fast because they knew I wasn't supposed to be there. That night, I sat in a quiet apartment with my laptop open, my legal team and investigators pulling logs, metadata access records. I sent a message telling them Brent was mobilizing HR, that Naya had been hit, that we needed to prepare, and something hardened in me. Monday morning, I came back in a suit. Nothing flashy, just undeniable. I walked through that same lobby with 2 senior partners from my firm. The receptionist froze. The guard stood straighter. I scanned my badge, the real one, and the elevator opened like it had been waiting for me all along. Upstairs, Brent was mid-presentation at a leadership meeting talking about restructuring and efficiency. The door opened and I walked in. His sentence died in his throat. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair he'd been using, and sat down. My partner introduced me as the majority stakeholder and acting owner. Brent smiled too fast, said it was a surprise. I told him it wasn't a surprise, it was a test. I said I'd spent days walking those halls, watching who got heard and who got erased, and the patterns weren't subtle. I told him the culture would shift, or the leadership would. After the meeting, he cornered me, said he didn't know who I was, said I'd caught them off guard. I told him no, I'd caught him as he was. He talked about moving past it. I told him I wasn't there to embarrass him, but I would remove obstacles if he stood in the way, and that should have been the end of it. But people like Brent don't stop. He teamed up with a board ally, stalled reforms, scrubbed numbers, leaked narratives, questioning my judgment. They painted my support of Nia as favoritism, twisted spreadsheets, forged reports. When I questioned the numbers, Brent said they came from Nia's earlier work. She said she hadn't approved them. HR accused her of manipulation. Media ran stories using a photo of me in a hoodie like it proved something. Then the board announced I was temporarily suspended from day-to-day decisions pending investigation. Imagine that. The owner suspended. And again, I stayed quiet. 12 days. No interviews, no statements. Because they were waiting for noise, and I gave them silence. Behind the scenes, my team built a wall of evidence, every email, every timestamp, every altered file. One morning, Nia found an envelope on her desk with proof she'd been framed. A note at the bottom said, "You were never alone." She met me later and said she thought I was gone. I told her I'd been quiet. There's a difference. I showed her the dashboard of truth, all of it laid out. She said it felt like war. I told her it was a reckoning. At the shareholder conference, the ballroom was packed. Brent stood near the front, confident again. The lights dimmed. He started his speech about integrity and renewal. I cut him off from the back of the room, heads turned. I walked down the aisle, Nia beside me with a folder marked Exhibit A. I introduced myself, told the room they'd been lied to, and let the screen behind us do the talking. Emails, memos, audit logs, surveillance footage of Brent mocking